welcome to Perspectives on Working with the Press. I called it Dealing with the Press, but this is a much more polite title. The reason we're using microphones is that we're streaming this over the internet so that everybody back at their desk can hear us. So just a little bit before I introduce the panel, I'm going to hand a mic around if you have any questions during the question and answer period. And you have to wait till you're actually talking into a microphone so that the people back home can hear us. And using the mic, you can't go, hey, so, I was thinking about the... They have to hold the mic right here and talk into the mic. Didn't work, did it? So I've invited the most experienced people in the county, I think, with working with the press. They've probably worked for us the longest. They've had lots of different experiences that I wanted them to share. And they'll share a couple of stories, and then we'll open it up for questions. We can ask them all kinds of things. At 3 o'clock, I've got 5 members of the local press coming, so each of the media organizations represented. So then we can ask them questions about what they're looking for and how we can best work with them. So we've got Nan Sundin, Human Services Director, Brian Pettit, Public Works Director, Alex Bruchetta, it's a commander of something, Operations Commander of the Sheriff's Department.
Operations Command.
Gary Tenenbaum, Open Space and Trails Director, and our County Manager, John Peacock. So with that, I'm going to open up for Nan to give us a little introduction and tell us a couple of stories.
Sure. Thanks, Pat. I think, first of all, I know you said we're experts, but I'm looking around the room, and I know a lot of you have a lot of experience. So I feel like on some level we're speaking to the choir. But I will share with you a couple of experiences and be brief. First of all, human services is not human resources. That's one of the first things we have to clarify with the press. We're not personnel. I don't know the personnel policies as well as I should, but I do know the business of human services really well. And if I don't know it, I know where to find the answer. And human services is child and adult protection, senior services, all eligibility services for welfare programs, veteran services, and then we have the Healthy Community Fund that raises $2 million for our nonprofit agencies. So that's what human services is. Often with the press, I have to clarify, do you really want to talk to me? Do you want to talk to public health? Do you want to talk to environmental health? That's sort of my first response when they call is, what exactly are you looking for? So I get them to the right person. And I definitely do my very best not to speak on anything of which I know nothing, like environmental health. And now we have a public health department. So that's really good. We've had a lot of success in human services. I think because our team responds right away to the press. When they call, that's a priority call for us, and we call them back. We find out what they need, what they're looking for. We try to find out what their angle is, and then we find out who is the right person to talk to them. So we've made ourselves a resource that is trustworthy and credible. Not incredible, just credible. And in particular, I think one of our greatest successes is we've had to renew the Healthy Community Fund or initiate it 3 times. We've had tremendous press success. We try to be the providers of accurate information about what the needs are, what the agencies do, and how much the fund it would be raising. And I think that we have successfully over 3 years been endorsed by all the papers, and a lot of that is because the needs are real and important, but also because we're giving the press information that's relevant for them. We also, in the Healthy Community Fund renewal, have used citizens to speak on our behalf about what the needs are. And some of that is a citizen, once it gets to a ballot question, there's a whole thing outside of what the county does. But when citizens speak to what the needs are, it takes on a whole new relevance for the community, I think. I think there's a difference between crisis and community awareness building. And so in crisis response, I have had a few experiences with crisis response. At one point, I was the Community Relations and Health and Human Services Director, BP, before Pat. I hired Pat, I'm happy to say. And you know, what I find is that it's the hardest time to pull together all your information is in the middle of a crisis. It's stressful, your adrenaline's going, I don't write as well. So we try to keep data and statistics available so that we can pull them when we need them. I guess in terms of what works well, one thing that I do, and I think our team does pretty well, is we don't struggle with little inaccuracies in stories, right? So the press constantly gets confused about what is Medicaid, what is Medicare, what is TANF, what is CCAP, it's complicated. And they did a story like a month ago about the city of Aspen's funding of nonprofits in human services. And they went between the city and the county and the funding. If you knew what they were writing about, it was wrong. Some of it was wrong. And Mitzi and I talked about, do you write a letter and ask them to redact or change? And I pretty much have held that we don't do that unless it's really an egregious mistake. And I think that I believe that the news changes every day, and the citizens locally, they're on to the next story, and they don't care about the details. So I think those are things that we do pretty well. And the one thing, a negative story, I was trying to think of a negative story. I worked the airplane crash as the PIO. Which airplane crash? The one where 18 people died at the airport in 2006. Six. I've blocked some of it.
It was one.
5. Oh, you're right, it was early.
It was 2. It was right after September 11th, or right before. It was 1 or 2. So one of the things that happened was it was an evolving story, and the TSA, the National Safety Transportation Board, came to study the accident. And they were holding press conferences. And they had a press conference, and this woman who was the commander said, we believe potentially that this airport is not safe, and we wrote a NOTAM a month ago that the approach was not safe, right? And I was sitting next to Peter Van Pelt, who was the airport director, in an auditorium. It was the first time he heard that. And he turned to me and he said something like, oh my God, it's not safe. And right behind me was a national press person, right behind both of us. And that's what got picked up. So we started to get calls from LA, Chicago, Japan, other airports saying, is it safe? Is it safe? It's like the Marathon Man, that movie, right? Is it safe? No, it's not safe. Is it safe? Yes, it's safe. And the problem was that the airport at the time did not have an accurate bit of information about how many accidents had happened. They didn't have the NOTAM. They didn't have any information to refute whether it was safe or not safe. And so the story became much bigger. And in an after-action debrief, you know, what we talked about at length was having departments really have data that could be pulled, as I said, in a crisis. You can't anticipate everything the press is going to want to know, but you probably want to know things like, have accidents happened before? You know, what's the process for when NOTAMs, which is basically a memo, is sent, and that kind of stuff. So we learned a lot from that the hard way. It was super painful to have the national and international news talking about how unsafe we were. And it was all because nothing is off the record, and there are ears everywhere. So just be careful what you say, when you say it, where you say it in a crisis. That's it.
Great. Do you want to do questions for Nan or just?
I think let's go all the way across, and then we can open it up for questions.
Sounds
if there's
great.
a burning question anywhere along the way, feel free. Let me know, and I'll bring the mic over.
Great. I'm Brian Pettit. I'm the Public Works Director, and I'm just going to make a few points and then also tell a story to close with, since that seems to be a trend.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I started it.
But I would like to start off, if you get called by the press, you should be honored to begin with, because they're looking for source credibility, someone that is an expert in what they want to talk about, someone that's trustworthy, and someone that's dynamic, that's going to give them a pull quote or on the radio be able to talk with enthusiasm. So those three things give you source credibility, and if they're calling you, that's the reason why. And the first thing to do is, just like you would do if you fall into class 4 waters in the river, is not to panic. If the press calls you, don't panic, because you're not going to think clearly then. And hopefully you've established a relationship before the press calls, because I've always seen it as a symbiotic relationship. They have things to benefit from calling me, which is a story, and I have a lot to benefit from them, which is to get my story told the way I want it told. And so when the press calls, one of the first things I do is put on my citizen hat, which is to think about what the citizen would want to know about the story that's being written. Because the press is trying to sell papers or to sell advertising in our papers because they're free. But they're trying to get a story out there, and they're looking for something that someone's interested in. And so to give them their story, which is to sell papers, but also get the story that I want told. That's important. So to be concise, to answer the phone when they're called, it's always a priority when the press calls. I call them back immediately or send a text saying, I'll call you as soon as I can, so they know I'm going to get back to them. If they don't get it right and they misquote you, it could be an honest mistake, and to give them the benefit of the doubt, because mistakes happen. And always remember, what's news one day is forgotten the next. One thing that happened to me recently was I needed to honor confidentiality with representation that I was doing with the state of Colorado. So CDOT was not getting back to the press, and there was a story about Smith Way where someone recently died in an auto accident. CDOT wasn't returning the calls. I was the local person that was the most credible in this situation, and I was representing a lot of what CDOT was saying and their data. CDOT had sent me a data sheet that was confidential, but hadn't told me that. So it was very critical for me not to be giving information out to the press that was confidential in nature, and maybe Alex can talk more about that in his time. But the story I have to tell maybe is more about email than it is about press relations, but they're related. And that you should never be sarcastic in an email. And this story happened a while back when many of you, maybe not, weren't here when a guy named Wilk Wilkinson had built a home up on Smuggler Mountain near the top. Wilk had done a marvelous job salvaging materials from the landfill and built this house clearly of salvaged materials. And in doing so, probably didn't meet one building code that the county had. So through this effort, and I want to say it's the early 1990s, I was 26 years old. I was running the street department, the road department at the time, and the county manager took it to task to make Wilk come in and get a building permit for his home that he'd constructed on Smuggler Mountain. Wilk refused. Multiple times would not come in to get a building permit or go through any process. In the end, the Board of County Commissioners directed the county manager to tear Wilk's house down. The county manager called the Public Works Director at the time, my boss, and said, Stan, you need to tear the house down. Stan told me, Brian, get the road crew, get whatever you need up there, we're going to tear the house down next week. And sent an email to me directing me to do that. And at the end, said, boy, this is going to be fun. Meaning, this isn't going to be fun at all. We're tearing someone's home down. After the event happened and we tore Wilk's house down and hauled it all to the landfill, which, I mean, Phoebe Ryerson was chaining herself up to the gate. It was a local scene at the time. The press did a CORA request and requested any email associated with the tearing down of Wilk's home. The email that my boss had sent me was released to the press that said, boy, isn't this going to be fun? And that hit the papers the next week. So just be aware of it. I mean, I think we're our own worst enemy sometime with regard to the press. Just be aware of the story that you're trying to tell. Don't give them information that you don't want them to have. Offhanded comments or emails that are sarcastic in nature, these can all weigh against you in the end. I think that's all I have.
Thanks, Brian. Hey, I'm Alex Burchetta with the Operations Commander with the Pitkin County Sheriff's Office. I'm also one of the designated PIOs for the office. My position at the Sheriff's Office is interesting because Joe and sheriffs beforehand have actually empowered all of the deputies to be able to speak with the press. So oftentimes you'll see press releases come out through Pitkin Alert, or you'll see information in the paper and it says Michael Buglione, or it says, Deputy so-and-so. And that's something that Joe has given us the opportunity and the power to do, is to have that open dialogue with the press. Oftentimes, though, when something requires a little bit more involvement, or we want to provide a single point of contact for the media, the local media specifically, I will jump in as the single point of contact public information officer for our office. I think the biggest thing, aside from the things that you guys have spoken about, the biggest thing for me is building the relationships with our local media, because those relationships can end up helping us in certain times. I know that Jason Auslander, for example, with the Aspen Times, walks into our office and sits down and has a cup of coffee in my office, and we talk, and that oftentimes just becomes a story. But it's over the years that he's worked here and that I've worked here that we've built that relationship, and I have that rapport with them. And that helps us because oftentimes, specifically for us, we are often giving out information that's reactionary. So it's about a traffic accident, or it's about an avalanche, or it's about some other type of incident. But we also need to give out information about wildfire safety or flood safety. And those relationships are key because they want to sell papers, they want viewers, they want readers on their website. So the juicy stuff, like unfortunately, like the car accident or some other incident, they'll pick that up really quickly. But it's maybe the less exciting stuff about flood safety or wildfire safety that they won't pick up. But if we have that relationship and I ask them to, hey, this is important to us, can we really get it out? Kind of like the iPause test that we did with the alerting system a few weeks ago. That was important information, but it wasn't really the most exciting information. But Jason took it upon himself to really push that up into the forefront of their papers. So that relationship really helped us. I think I've been doing this for 10 years. The biggest change that I've seen is the difference from us disseminating information strictly via press release to now us disseminating information predominantly on social media. So we don't just have this relationship with the media, we have it with the public. And it's not just information on a sheet of paper that gets sent out via Pitkin Alert and you read it on your phone. It's now a conversation. So we're having this dialogue with people on social media, Facebook messaging and Twitter, and it's just taken on a different it's different from when it was 10 years ago, and I'm sure different for when it was what it was for people that have been doing it longer than I have. My little story, I'll share a story. It was about 8 years ago. Mountain Rescue had a mission up on one of the peaks, and they're really not supposed to be jumping out of helicopters, right? That's a danger thing. We look at the risk of jumping out of helicopters, and I was, of course, new and talking to one of the media on the phone, and I said. I think I said that they stepped out of the helicopter. Well, I got misquoted, and they said that, Deputy Burchetta said that the mountain rescue folks jumped out of the helicopter to save this person. And as soon as the article hit on the Aspen Times website, I got text messages, and we didn't jump out of that, So, yeah, you have to just sort of be okay with them misquoting you. You know it's going to happen. It's just going to happen, and you can't really take it personally. But it was just a little story for you.
Oh, I got to turn it on. You're supposed to yell at me, Mike. Yeah. So anyway, so I am in the paper a lot. I just Google myself, and every time you Google yourself, you see how many times you're in the newspaper. And I'll start out with a funny thing and it'll go into what I did about it, was when I first started, the newspapers like open space and trails. They think we have a story like every week, so we get called or emailed from all the newspapers and Aspen Public Radio about stories of the week and what do you got going on and all this stuff. And one year we were talking about more open space and the Nordic out at more. Now that it's turning springtime, what's going on? And I said, well, the deer are doing their thing, and, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on, and they're having fun. The elk are probably doing their thing, too. And I didn't even realize that Janet Herkart quoted me on all of that in the newspaper. And so what we ended up doing was hiring Janet. And I think that's one of the, you know, for us as an open space program that gets in the media a lot. And really, you know, we are a very public agency. You know, we take it pretty seriously about dealing with the press, and we all know internally of how we can deal with it and who can deal with it, because, you know, yes, everyone's allowed to talk to the press, but a lot of people in my office are a little gun shy because we've been misquoted many times, or our quotes, I shouldn't say always misquoted, but our quotes are kind of exaggerated or expanded or changed a little bit, and you're like, you get a little tired of that, and you're like, whoa, they push them to me, but the key for me is to make sure that when the press calls, someone's going to answer, and someone's going to answer really quickly. And, you know, the hardest ones you're going to deal with is probably Aspen Public Radio, because they'll call you on the phone and be like, do you mind if I record you? And you're like, yes. Okay. And then she switches over and she's like, hi, this is Elizabeth Severy with Aspen Public Radio. Can you give me your name? And you start to do that, and you really have to think about what you say, because whatever you say can be used on the radio. And I am always amazed at how many people listen to Aspen Public Radio, because I always get an email. It's like, nice quote today. And I'm like, or you get the opposite is, the fact is we have a lot of information that we want to get out there. And the press is the easiest, cheapest, and, you know, most overreaching way to get your message out to the public. And so embracing them, developing relationships with them, I think all of us have said that, is really important, because that's when you can kind of have a conversation, even with Aspen Public Radio, when you're on the recording, and be like, Elizabeth, can you hold on a second and take that out, and can we do that again? If you have that relationship, she'll say, sure, no problem, and change that. And same thing with like Scott Condon or Jason Oslander. You develop that relationship, and you could say something. If you don't like it, say, hey, put that off the record and try to say something else. So you're trying to get the message clear and trying to be, you know, open too, because honestly, some quotes, they want a quote. And if you can think of something that's, you know, something that really will catch them, they'll come back to you and ask for more stories, because they like the story. That's what they're going for. They're going for the story. And so right now we have a couple of controversial projects out there that they're looking for the angle and the story, and trying to get the correct information on that story is critical. And when you get misquoted, so many times I'm like, I just want to email Scott or something like that. But you take a deep breath and you go, tomorrow everyone will forget that. So on that, I will turn it over to John.
All right, thank you. Well, you can tell the introvert on a panel by the one that does the PowerPoint. So I will apologize for walking you through the... So I want to just talk first. Those of you who have been to presentations with me before know I like to quote dead people to start off. And de Tocqueville was writing in the late 1800s, and he was a French, really, sociologist who came over originally, I believe, to study the prison systems, and then just did this really exhaustive study of American democracy that has been a seminal work for a long, long time. And de Tocqueville was especially interested in the role of the local press in the United States, because we had more local newspapers and more local media than any other country in the world at the time. Most countries had maybe one or two major newspapers. We had thousands upon thousands in the late 1800s. And it was really because local papers reflected the unique kind of characteristics of a local community. And what's really unique about the United States is that we have significant decision-making authority at the local level. And so it really mattered what a local newspaper said. And his observation, part of which I have up here, is that nothing but a newspaper, and I think you could substitute any media that's happened after 1839 into this, but nothing but a newspaper can drop the same thought into 1,000 minds at the same moment. A newspaper is an advisor that does not require to be sought, but that comes of its own accord and talks to you briefly every day of the common weal without distracting you from your private affairs. To suppose that they only serve to protect freedom would be to diminish their importance. They maintain civilization. And so it's really important, particularly when we're dealing with the local media, to understand the really important role they play in reflecting our local community values, our local community perceptions, and paying attention to that when we're making decisions. And it's also really important then, as everyone has said up here, that we be responsive, really responsive to requests for information and such from particularly our local media. And you're going to see I divide my advice up differently between how you deal with local media and how you deal with national or international media, which has already been highlighted. So I've got a few simple rules to share with you, and I think that's probably a little bit hard to see, but John Fahey, who I think is going to be here, right, dropped off a 12-pack of beer at our county offices with a note basically saying, "You guys are the most friendly and open local government I've ever worked with, basically. Thank you." Then somebody subsequently broke into our offices and stole it, but that's a whole nother story. I don't know. I think that was in the paper, actually. But so couple simple rules for working with the local press. Always tell the truth, never fake it. That seems obvious, but the never fake it part can be hard, especially when you're fielding your first press calls. As Brian said, I remember when I got my first press calls, which I'll talk about here in a minute, I was terrified. And the last thing I wanted to appear like is that I didn't know what I was talking about when maybe I should know what I was talking about, or that I couldn't represent somehow on an issue. And it led to some early mistakes of faking it, frankly, trying to really force the point or force an answer. To not fake it, particularly when you're new to dealing with the press, really ask yourself the question first, am I the right one to be answering this? Is there somebody else that may know more about this or is better suited to answer this question? And it is a perfectly fine answer to a reporter to say, you know what, I may not be the best person to talk to you about this. Can I help get you to the right person? I do that as the county manager, and believe me, it's very easy for the press to come to me and say, shouldn't you know this? Shouldn't you know some more about this? But they don't. When you say, you know, I think there may be somebody better to talk to. For example, the Smith Hill Way story that Brian was just talking about, that press call actually came to me first. I referred it out because I knew that I was not the best person to talk about that. When I get questions about the Crystal River Trail right now, I know I'm not the best person to talk about that. And whenever it comes to anything law enforcement related, I definitely know I'm not the best person to talk about that. But really ask yourself, it's okay to not answer the question. It's okay to hand it off to somebody. And if you don't know who that is, call Pat or call your manager or your section leader. We'll find them. Yeah, Pat will find them.
John, and the other thing you did was you called me and let me know that they were going to be calling.
Oh, yeah, I like to do that too. Every now and then I like the surprise, but usually I try and give you a heads up. The other thing that can be really important and really difficult is when you get that press call, sometimes you know that press call is coming. And so you have time to formulate what is the message. And it's really important to do that because, as everyone has talked about up here, there's a couple of things about what we do. One is it's typically complicated. There's no job here that is easy to explain in 30 seconds. There's no decision that the county makes that the press is going to be interested in that you can explain easily in 30 seconds. But that's about what you've got. Sometimes you have a little bit more, but really they're doing a pull quote. So it's going to be 30 seconds of speaking that ends up in there, right? In any story, whether it be on the radio, the newspaper, what have you. And so it's really important for you when you have that media call to think about what the message needs to be and to stick to it to the greatest degree possible. And if you haven't had time, sometimes you just have to buy yourself time. It is oftentimes quite appropriate, almost every time it's quite appropriate to say, hey, I need to spend I need a few minutes to look into that, and I'm going to give you a call right back. Or if you're referring it out, I'm going to help you find these people. If you need time, if you don't know it ahead of time, go ahead and buy yourself time. It's really important because what goes out in the local media really does formulate community opinions about what we should be doing and how well we're doing it. And so to really get that message right and to stay on point is important. For the local media, you've heard, I think, from everyone here, these are priority calls. We've got to help the media do their job to get whatever they're reporting on out to the public and to get our side of a story out to the public. And that means helping them do their job. It means calling them back quickly. It means, where I started out, making sure that they're talking to the best resource in the county to give the information. That may be you, it may be somebody else, but really help them do their job by getting to the best information possible. Don't call them back after a deadline. Typically they're working on deadlines at 4, 5, 6, right, Pat? I guess it depends for different media, but if that's as soon as you can get back to them, great. Maybe that story can wait, but try and help them try and get back to them in a time frame that they can do their job and do it with a certain amount of thought. The last bullet point is be friendly, but be careful about being a reporter's friend. Now, just as a caveat, I am not telling you not to be a reporter's friend. They're very nice people, and it's a small town. I get that. But it's really easy, particularly if you're new to dealing with the press, as you're building that relationship with the press, and you're getting into that friendly zone. It can be really difficult to separate out what's on record, what's on background, what's not. And as you get friendlier, it's really easy to get into a space where you develop an expectation that what you're saying is kind of background, and they're going to come back and ask you for the quote, and then you read something in the paper you didn't mean to be there, right? Maybe like deer are doing their thing, or the elk are doing their thing, or what have you. And so it's really important to remember that reporters have a job to do, and it's a very important job to do. And when they're talking to you, you should always assume they're doing it. And so be very clear, even as you're building that relationship with the local press, about when you're being friendly, right? And being friends, and maybe being a little less formal and a little less strategic in your communications. But I can't emphasize enough, for the local press, these folks are members of our community. I've never been in a community where the local press hasn't cared about the community. Is there spectacle in the stories? Are they looking for something that people want to read about? Yes. Does that usually involve some drama? Sure. And that's okay. But generally, these are folks that are part of our community, want our community to be successful, and we need to treat them that way. The last point that I want to reemphasize that everyone has also said, you need to think about the accuracy of the stories as horseshoes and hand grenades. Close is good, right? You do not want to spend the bullets of asking for a correction that often. It has to be a really, really major mistake. Because as we've all said, what we do is complicated. Explaining it in a short period of time is hard. And expecting reporters who are working on a lot of deadlines to get every last thing correct isn't realistic. And if you want to ruin a relationship with the press, ask them to correct little things. It's just, it doesn't matter that much, and it creates a dynamic that's not beneficial for both. There are times when it's big enough and important enough, you got to go back and say, hey, normally wouldn't ask for this, but this is kind of a big deal. And as long as you don't play that card too often, particularly our local media, I've found to be very open to those conversations. I think the national and international press is a different story. And actually, my experience with the press started with the national and international press, and you'll see some old kind of news coverage here. Before going into local government, I taught political science and public administration at the University of Wyoming. One of my students was killed. One of my students and advisees was killed. His name was Matthew Shepard. Some of you may remember that. He was a gay student. He was tied to a fence and beaten and left to die. It created a remarkable media storm. It was a slow news cycle, I think, and national and international press descended on this little town. I was, Brian, like you, I was 26 at the time that this happened. I had zero experience with the press, and the day after he died, Time Magazine, Newsweek, Nightline, and ABC News were in my classroom. That is actually how my in-laws first saw me, was on Nightline. I was wearing a really poorly colored blue shirt, they informed me. At any rate, that went on for about a month of pretty intensive news coverage. I had MTV show up at my house, and I was in my bathrobe, and all kinds of weird things happened. And I learned some lessons that I've carried through that I think are still true for dealing with the national and international press. One, that's where sensationalism really comes into play. Typically, the national press and international press do not have a strong link to the community. They are not engaged or necessarily thoughtful about your local community, the local community values, or the impact of these stories on the local community. Sensationalism is really what plays. So you really need to ask yourself when faced with the national and international press, do you want to talk, and are you the right one to talk? Because what I found with the national press in particular is I could ask them up front what their storyline was. Wasn't what that they're trying to discover. They were coming to this story in particular with a particular storyline that they were looking for poll quotes to support. And so I'd make decisions about whether I was the right one to talk to based on what their storylines are. But when dealing with the national and international press, unlike the local press, the staying on message is even more important if you even want to be part of that message. And then you always tell the truth and you never fake it. I am not as concerned. I'm very concerned about working with our local press, make sure we're helping them do their jobs, make sure we've got that timely response going. Frankly, I've been less concerned because of my experience with the national and international press is keeping that as a ground rule. Obviously, when we have incidents, it's a different situation that's pressed on us. Also, when dealing with the national and international press, think about that role of spectacle a lot more. There's this picture of the angels up top. I don't think I can do a pointer, but I think you can see it. Those were students of ours, actually, that were protesting a Reverend Fred Phelps who came in, who was kind of big on, you know, Matthew deserved this, is gay, so on and so forth. And so they were organizing a counter-protest, you know, to show that the community wasn't about that. And we pointed out that all they're going to see is a bunch of angry people yelling at each other, and they're going to see these signs, and I'm not sure, you know, is that really where you want to go? Think about the spectacle. I wish I could say this was my idea. It wasn't. The students came up with creating angel wings, and you can't see behind, but all Fred Phelps protesters are behind the angel wings. So you can use sensationalism in different ways when it comes to those types of stories. But again, that's not something that you have to do with our local press. That is a different ball game when you're dealing with the local press versus when you're dealing with the national and international press. Finally, just pay attention. Once you are in the press, it can live on forever. I'm still doing interviews. I did interviews at the 10-year anniversary. I get calls still today when folks are doing the plays and such. So just pay attention. You really want to pay attention to your words because they are recorded forever. And they're more accessible now than ever. So with that, I went over time.
Well, can I just add one thing that I don't know anyone said? It's as an elected official and also a county employee or for elected officials, one thing I always try to remember that I am representing, I see Patty in the background, you're representing the Board of County Commissioners. And so that is one thing to always remember, that you're representing the elected body and it's really their decisions that and their priorities that we're carrying out. So that's a really important thing. As an elected official, I always remember, because I am staff, is that you have a lot of great staff. And, you know, as an elected official, you always want to talk to the press, and you always want to make sure that you never throw staff under the bus, because they're doing the work for you. And yes, we all make mistakes, but that's a really important point to make.
But for most of us, I went back to this slide because for 99% of the press calls that we're dealing with, it's the local press. And so those are the points that I think we really, as a group, need to focus on.
And speaking of the local press, I think a few of them have arrived. The way this panel was set up was to have the first hour be our experienced people in the county to give their stories of what works and what doesn't. And then the second half was going to be a panel of local press members to tell what can help them do their jobs better. But we started a little bit late, so if you guys could bear with us, we haven't even gotten to the question and answer part yet. So now is your opportunity to ask a question, and but let me come to you with the mic before you start talking. So just raise your hand, and I'll bring the mic over.
I'm Patty Clapper. I just have another point I want to add to this. I've been involved with the press for almost 30 years, starting with Smuggler Superfund, done international, national, all levels of media, 2020, 60 Minutes, The New Yorker. And still today, what I always remember is I still get a little bit nervous. And I've decided that's okay. It keeps me on point. It makes sure that I don't just sit back and get too comfortable with what I'm saying and how I'm saying it. I'm always trying to stay on my mark. And you know, I tend to ramble. That's kind of who I am. But when you're talking with the press, you have to be really careful with what you say and how you say it. And John's right. Everyone, you're all right. You know, if you stick to the truth, it's easy to remember your story because your story is always the same. So that's really important. And Gary, what you said, I appreciate. But when I speak to the press at any level about anything, I always remember that I represent, when it comes to county issues, I represent all of you. I represent all of the people who work for Pitkin County, and I'm very proud of the work that everyone does. So it's also a reflection of what I am saying as to how we do business as a county. And in other cases, I also represent all of the constituency of Pitkin County. So I have to always keep that in mind, and it just kind of keeps you on track with what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so it's not, you know, you just never, I enjoy speaking with the press. I've gotten used to it, but I'm not always comfortable. I'm always still kind of on that edge, and I think that's a good thing. So, you know, it's not bad to be nervous, guys. It's part of it. So thank you.
Anybody else?
This might be a little bit more awkward now that some of the press has shown up, but we've been afforded very good relationship with the local press, and you've all touched on that. I don't know if any of you could give us a little bit of the delta of how lucky we are because of that, and what it's like when you feel like you're constantly in a gotcha moment.
Well, it feels like you're constantly in a gotcha moment. So have you guys been in that situation here?
Yes, but with prior. I mean, no one currently, not with Jason or John, but with prior press back, you know, there were times where whatever you say, what you can't. Actually, Scott Condon got me once. A gotcha. He was just there when I got elected the first time, and all of a sudden I said, "We killed him," and he printed that front page. That was the front page thing. We killed them, and I'm like, you just totally you just killed me. I mean, thanks. I mean, so sorry, Scott, if you're watching, but you know, it was a really bad moment, and it was one of those that you got to watch what you say when they're around. Sorry, John, but you do have to watch what you say, because even when you're excited, he got me, and and that's not the message I wanted to give out when I started a 4-year term on Basalt Town Council. I did not want that message out, but I got excited and I said it, and they got me.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say I've had a few experiences where the reporter got the story right, but the headline was a gotcha. Mm-hmm. And the headline, as I understand, is maybe written by someone else, and that's just frustrating, but you got to let it go. It's just what it is. Yeah.
Newspapers are in the business, about how that works.
And I just remember batting averages, right? 300 is a really great batting average. That's hitting things out of 30% of the time. We do, and our local press does so much better than that for us. And frankly, sometimes, guys, it turns out we do stupid things, and it should be in the paper. And we don't like it when it is, but that's the job. And we signed up for public service, so it happens.
I thought it was interesting what Gary said, because having been in the radio business for the first half of my career, people in print, you can always say, well, they misquoted me, right? I didn't say that. I was misquoted. But on radio, it's exactly as Gary said. No, I'm afraid you said that. And I think, in defense of the press, a lot of times we do say the wrong thing. We don't say it right. And we hope that we can say we were misquoted to our boss, but we might have said it wrong. And
I'm pretty sure my voice doesn't sound like it does on radio.
Anybody else?
I just have I have a question, actually. You guys, and we all know that relationship is really important. The press changes, and they change their beat or they change their focus. How do you all stay abreast of who's covering what and who you need to have a relationship with?
They usually show up at our
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't
Hey,
we
I'm the
don't
new
get
guy.
them over where we are. We're nice enough out of town.
Yeah,
but-
Jason showed up like 4 years ago, right, Jay? And it was like, yeah, I don't know who this guy is. But no, I mean, I think it's the relationship with the organization too. It's not so much just the person; it's also the Aspen Times. I know I've spoken to a number of reporters from both organizations, both papers, and it's not just Jason or it's not just Chad. It's the agency behind it as well. There's just a level of trust you develop with them.
They usually call you. I
Yeah.
mean, honestly, it's like when John took over for the Asheville Daily News and this beat. You know, if you've developed a relationship with the prior, it'll transfer to the new, and it does take time. We always worry about that when the press does change. You know, you had that relationship and it was really great, but then all of a sudden you're like, okay, who's next and what do they want and what are they going to do and stuff like that. But, you know, over time, I think all of them are very community minded and none of them want to just come here, blow through and be gone. And so I mean, how many we've gone through, 6 or 7 different ones. So yeah, I mean, you just start again.
And one other question, when you do a press release and the press doesn't pick up on it, or they're not as interested, or how, you know, we think everything we do is so super important, but what do you do? How do you manage those situations?
I mean, from our perspective, if they don't pick up on it, it's just sort of okay.
Not moves.
Yeah, it's just no big deal. We obviously have different interests, but I'm not sure from the county level.
Pat?
Well, I think, you know, and we can ask the press. I think that's a good question to say for them and say, what are you looking for in a press release? What kind of news are you looking for? In my experience, you know, someone getting an award, being handed a plaque, that kind of thing isn't always going to get picked up on. But you can ask them, and you can look for a different angle. When I write press releases for all of you, I think, okay, food poisoning is a serious problem in Pitkin County. Well, that's exciting. Or, you know, okay, how many cases of food poisoning have there been? What kind of, you know, illness? How many people have gone to the hospital? Look for something newsworthy. It's got to have I look for angles because I come from a reporting background, so I know that they're not going to write it if it doesn't have a sort of a newsworthy angle. In journalism school, it was man bites dog. Did you guys study that in journalism school? Instead of dog bites man isn't news. Man bites dog, that's news. So you kind of look for your man bites dog angle. And if you ever want help on looking for an angle, call me. I'm really good at thinking of them. Anybody else?
Face the press later. Everyone should know that these meetings that we broadcast on Grassroots are great, but people watch.
Yeah.
People watch these. It's amazing how many people watch our meetings replayed, live, whatever they are. So when you come before the board at a work session or regular meeting, we are on camera. And do you ever watch them? It's really kind of fun. But then you think, oh my God, did I really just say that? You know, and you're hoping that the community who's watching you is laughing as hard at you as you are laughing at yourself. But that's another thing we need to remember at all times when we're on these with Grassroots. The press may not be in the room, but they're watching us. They're watching us all the time. So we have to be careful at those sidebar conversations, which I'm still practicing with. So I just wanted that.
You'll never get a chance like this again.
Never.
So I was a communications guy for the Army back in 2004, and I actually worked with the 1st Infantry Division Military Public Affairs Detachment in Saddam's home palace. Anyways, the first week I was there, they made us very aware to look where you're standing when you're being filmed. For instance, there would be walls with the Farsi spray painted on the wall, and you have no idea what it says. It could say something completely opposite of what you think they're telling you or saying, and also pictures and that sort of things. So yeah, they'll have you think that you're kind of standing and doing one thing and you're unaware. I guess to put it in local context, maybe like if there's a land conservation effort or something like that, and they're having you stand in front of a Shell oil pipeline picture unbeknownst to you or something like that. So just be very aware of that sort of thing, you know. Yeah.
Good point.
I think based on what Patty said, and I don't know your name, but what you just, Ryan, thanks. I think that's really important, and I have asked, like this state media, for copies of clips so I can watch myself. And I have forced myself to watch myself on BOCC meetings because that's how I learn how I might be being received. And so I think that while it's painful sometimes to watch yourself or even read your quotes or listen to yourself on the radio, there's a lot of learning to be had.
The same time they kicked Geraldo out because he was drawing maps on the sand in front of the national press to where our troops were moving around and that sort of thing. So being a communications guy, they also said to be very aware of what maps and signal intel, codes, encryption, that sort of thing. I mean, that's more international and sort of thing or whatever. But just, you know, the mechanics of just stuff, don't release that just to anybody or whatever as well, because then the next thing you know, the bad guys know when you're showing up and that sort of thing. You know?
Well, and that brings up a good point, and it's more than we can cover here, but there are certain things that by law we're not allowed to talk about in the press, you know, personnel matters or what have you, which probably is more the local equivalent of what you're talking about, Ryan. There are certain things that we're just not allowed to disclose. And if you're going to talk to the press, you should be aware of those things. Let's get the experts.
Yeah, let's get the experts.
In-house experts, and thanks a lot. And now if our members of the press could file forward, we'll get you all squared away. Our panel of members of the press. I think we just have about every local press person representing every different parts of the press in the community. And I'm just going to let them introduce themselves and tell a little story about what it's like working with government, what your beat is, what you're looking for, kind of things you've run into that have worked, that haven't worked. Give us a little background, and then we'll open it up to questions. How's that?
I'm Allison Bektesh with Aspen Public Radio. We love to work with you guys. This is what we want to do, is local coverage, especially stuff that relates to what our listeners will feel or see, differences, changes. So anytime you guys are working on a project that our listeners would want to know about, and especially kind of maybe that needs a weedy explanation, I think for radio, we can give it 4 minutes. We can have you explain it instead of us try and figure it out and explain it. And all of that is always really effective and helpful. I think we kind of have a really nerdy audience, and they want to hear the intricacies of what's happening in the local government. As you know, it's a very engaged community.
Did you want us to give a little bit more of our backstories?
Sure, if you want, and then we can come back.
Okay.
Backstory, front story, side
That's my front story.
My name's Gavin Dahl. I'm the station manager for KD&K, Carbondale Community Access Radio. We broadcast on 8 FM signals, including 88.3 in Aspen and throughout much of Pitkin County. And I came to the Valley 2 years ago, working before for Open Media Foundation in Denver, which partners with Grassroots TV to provide meeting video archives and stuff like that. And so actually had Pitkin County as my client before I moved to the Valley, and was one of the reasons I wanted to come up here. Was I just was so attracted to a place where you have a lot of smart people in local leadership, and I'm not saying that to, I don't know what each of you do, so that's the truth. And working with Pat was always really fun, and Amy Gabb from Grassroots TV, who's here today. And so at KD&K, we do have a bit of a Carbondale focus. We kind of are a bit more down Valley focused. We definitely cover Garfield County Commission more than we do Pitkin, but we always try to do candidate interviews and kind of keep tabs on what's going on. And I think for us, really important beats include natural resources and public lands. So obviously, we are constantly covering things that Pitkin County is doing. And I'm now in my 19th year in community media, and I think KDNK is really one of a kind in terms of the access that it provides to the community to get onto the airwaves. We have over 100 different volunteer programmers. It's an incredible mission. At the same time, there are challenges that are unique to our operation that with the professionals that are primarily operating KJAX, we have a bit of different issues. So pretty much everyone you see up here is surrounded in their office by professionals, and we have such a mix of literally ages 8 to 92 on KDNK. I'm wearing my Andy Zinka Youth Empowerment Program shirt today to show off our youth program. But so what that means is that it's a much more of a sliding scale in terms of the kind of level of accountability and the experience and training that people have on KDNK. So we really try to provide what we can in terms of professional development to our volunteers, but we have talk show hosts who run the gamut from people who've never done something like this before, who have one specific niche issue, to deep experts on subjects like public land. So I think that's important for Pitkin County to remember with KDNK. You might hear from one of my volunteers who we don't know is contacting you, and so that's usually all in good faith. But almost always. But there is a big difference between talking to the news director at KDNK and talking to one of our 100 volunteers. So definitely keep that in mind. I definitely am looking forward to talking more.
Thanks. I'm Curtis Wackerly from Aspen Daily News. Oh, there we go. So that works. Hi. I'm Curtis Wackerly from Aspen Daily News, where I have been the editor for over 3 years, and I've been at the paper for 12. And I came to this community not necessarily to be a journalist. I thought it was just a temporary stop, but I found productive work, and it's been great. I love it here. I think the media environment is really unique. I think having 2 daily newspapers that are trying to proactively cover government and public interest issues is one of the things that's kept me here for so long. And the time just flies by when working on these 24-hour clocks and trying to have a good story the next day about what's going on, and something that's interesting and of value to the community that makes someone want to pick up their free paper. So worked more with city government officials than county in my time, but over the years have worked with some faces I see in the room today, and I think generally we're always interested, like Allison said, in the projects you're working on. It's a very important part of this community. What Pitkin County does is huge, from the nuts and bolts of government to the open space and the trails and environmental work, water issues. All this stuff is really interesting. So we're just out there trying to do something that's in the public interest and gather information and put it together in an interesting way.
I'm Jason Auslander from the Aspen Times, and I recognize quite a few of you in this room because I cover the county government, so a lot of you have dealt with me. I have been here almost 3 years. I lived here 20 years ago and worked for the Aspen Daily Blues. So this is my second time around here in Aspen. Again, I second the media environment here is great. And luckily, I feel fortunate to cover you all as the county as opposed to Curtis covering the city, because I think it's a lot easier and you all are a lot more accessible. But the main thing that I would say in dealing with us is, call me back. That's the most that I can ask. And if you, even if you call me back and you say, I can't talk to you about what you want to talk about, that's fine. But I was just talking because I cover the sheriff's office too, I was talking with the sheriff, and one of the deputies said, yeah, we're taught that if you give the press nothing, they'll just make it up. And I was like, come on, that's who's teaching you that, right? But that said, if you don't talk to me, then I go around you. I find, because I'm paid to not take no for an answer. So that's basically it.
John Fahey, I'm with the Aspen Daily News for another week. I'm one of the I came up here last winter to work for the Aspen Daily News, and I thought it was just for last winter, and that was this winter. I go back to New Mexico where I live next week. And I think covering, I don't know if you would officially say I cover anything, but I kind of utility player, but I cover the county sort of, and town of Basalt sort of, and covering Basalt, that's an interesting thing to do. Covering Pitkin County is the easiest thing I've ever done, and I've been doing this for a long time. The staff is so helpful and courteous that I feel like they're hiding something. It's like, as long as we're that friendly, we can go ahead and we can deal meth, and John will never suspect. So anyway, it's one of the best things about it is that a lot of governmental entities have the public information officer. Is that what your official title is? PIO? A lot of governmental entities, the public information officer is a gatekeeper, and all media stuff has to go through that person. And you want to talk about something that pisses media people off. I mean, the automatic reaction to that is, okay, now I'm going to really put my beer down and do my job. And so, for instance, the Forest Service here, and it's not their fault. It's the president's fault, I think. But the Forest Service, everything has to go through their public information officer. They're not allowed to talk. A guy just talked to me about a month ago about a pretty cool story, and he almost got fired. And because I had contacted them, I thought that they were sending him to me. So I'm sitting there thinking, oh shit, I almost got this guy fired. But anyway, the fact that Pitkin County employees are allowed and empowered to communicate one-on-one to the media is much appreciated, and I think it really helps the relationship between the county government and the media. And Pat does what I love about a public information officer, and that is when I don't know who to talk to, or I've heard something that I'm not quite sure is right or something, I can contact her and she'll point me into the right place. So I would say keep it up and keep dealing meth or whatever it is you guys do.
I want to explain a little bit more on what Jason said about calling us back. That's a huge point for me too. And again, if you're calling back to say, I don't know, or this is not public until Friday, part of it is our planning. On the radio every morning we have 3 to 5 stories total. So we know we want this story. If we are waiting for the call back to find out if it's going to be in the next news cycle, we might be crabbier when you do call back and say no, because we were holding a spot for you. So I think just saying here's when I can talk, or I'm getting numbers for you. With radio, it's very specific that that's literally a call if you're ready to talk, because we need what's called an actuality. I want your voice saying it, so I need to record that phone call. So emailing back a whole list of an explanation of something isn't very effective for a radio station, but just keeping in mind that it's part of it is scheduling, not just that we're mad at you. We want the story to go out. We need to know where to put it in our, on the page or in the rundown. Another thing is that when we're talking to you, it's not always because of something that you are directly doing. I just pulled up some of our recent stories that had the words Pitkin County in them, and they go from opioid use to greenhouse gas emissions to immigrations and custom enforcement, disaster preparedness. Like sometimes you are the context to a bigger story. So maybe you only have one piece of the information, but that doesn't mean don't call me back and tell me what you do know. I'm talking to lots of people and I can fill this out and you are one aspect of it. So don't feel that you need to be, I want to ask you questions that you do know the answer to. I'm trying to explain this issue to my listeners.
Yeah, and to that point too, I think there's a perception out there that we're out to get you on some levels, and it's not. Especially, I was listening to John talk about the difference between the national and the international and the local media, and not that they're out to get you either, but they may have, we're just calling you to find out some facts about something, and if the questioning is perceived by you to be that, it's usually not. I mean, it's almost always not, because we're just trying to find out about a bridge, about a open space, about a jail inmate, or something like that. So I think there's that misperception that is perpetuated, especially now, by the president, by the current administration, and it definitely can get in the way of that relationship, I think.
I'm really looking forward to hearing all of your questions. One of the things I want to make really clear about KD&K is that we have a lot of opportunity for you guys to get the word out about all the different things that are happening in so many different departments. And I want to give you a couple of quick pro tips, particularly if you're taking notes. Anything that you think is newsworthy that you want us to cover, press release about a specific event or something, should go to news@kdnk.org. And our news director is a young guy from Carbondale, Raleigh Burley, who I was the former news director, and when I got promoted to manager, I hired him, and one of our members came up to me and said, "I'm just so impressed with Raleigh. It's so nice to have an intellectual in the news department." And I was like, "Thank you. Yeah, I did a good job hiring him, didn't I?" And he's great. You guys will love him, and very kind of like Jason's saying, he's not out to get anyone. He's really trying to tell stories, and I think a big thing that we're looking for is solutions, particularly when you talk about housing and health and some of the ongoing challenges that we have and our listeners face. A lot of our listeners are lower income, and so if you guys have unique, interesting, creative approaches to things, which I know so many of you do, we could be a great outlet to help get those stories out. Another thing that Allison and I both are challenged by in the radio world is the clock. How much time we have, because we're both NPR stations, that can really limit how much detail we can go into. One of the nice things about KD&K being a community station is we do have some longer segments. They certainly are doing some great longer stuff too. I'm not knocking it, but we are limited somewhat by the NPR clock, and so that's one of the other things that we might be able to do a whole 26-minute sit down just talking to Pat about one initiative. And so that's something else to think about with us is if you have something that's sort of nuanced or detailed or complex, we might be a good place to help kind of go into more detail with that. If you have something that's event specific, that's a date on the calendar, something that you want a public service announcement for, I would encourage you to email calendar@kdnk.org. And it's fine to you can always just send something to me and I can redirect it for you. But those are really specific kind of pro tips for you. And then if you submit something that's event specific to our website, we both have community calendars on our website. That's where our program director specifically pulls. It has to be posted to our website to get a public service announcement read by the DJs. So you go to kdnk.org, it says calendar, and then you click submit a PSA or event. So those are just some pro tips. And then the one other thing I wanted to mention is I mentioned that we're kind of looking for solution ideas and innovations and stuff like that. We're now part of a Western Slope reporting collaborative that's focused on natural resources. And so right now we're really excited about trying to show off some of the cool ideas both at the city of Aspen and the county that the rest of the state can learn from. So that's another thing is think about us. Both of our stations are part of a collaborative around the state. So it might be also working with us might be a chance to reach people in Fort Collins or in Colorado Springs, and that's another point of access that we can offer you guys is to try to spread the message on a wider scale. We interview Congressman Scott Tipton once a month. It's the only regular interview he does with the local press, and so we share that then with stations in Durango and Telluride and Paonia and throughout his district. So there is a lot of that opportunity to kind of show off some of your guys' brilliance, I think, around the state. And coming from KGNU, in fact, both Allison and I have previously volunteered at the Boulder station. Same thing there. It's like there are so many innovations and kind of clever people. It's one of how I first met John was through the municipal league and the city and county managers. Immediately just became aware this is sort of higher level thinking than you see at a lot of the other local governments around the state. And so I think our broadcasts. Again, I don't want to speak for you, but at KD&K we really are interested in trying to stimulate some good ideas around the state, and so I think not to say that we're just a straight PR outfit, but there is a lot of opportunity to kind of get your voices out beyond the normal reach in the county.
All right. Any other front story, back story, side story from you guys? I'll open it up to questions. Make sure that you speak into the mic. I'll bring it over to you. Raise your hand. Maybe the next person after the person that's talking can raise their hand. I'll bring another mic over.
I'll just reiterate a question that came up earlier. Can you talk about the relationship between the reporter and the editor and what happens to the story? I guess this is newspaper related, maybe radio, but how does that function?
Well, it depends on the organization. Obviously, for the Aspen Times, most of the time I write the story, I turn it in, he reads it. If he has any questions, he calls me, changes it, or doesn't, and that's it. If it's something that, there's any multitude of issues that can come up where, do we want to cover this? How do we want to cover this? Do we want to use a name here? Do we want to not use a relationship here? For instance, if it's like a mother-daughter, do you just want to say it's a family relationship? Or do you have any specific example that you were thinking of? Or
Well, I think the issue came up on the previous panel that maybe the headline isn't what matches the story or vice versa.
Well, I mean, that's a process, definitely, and so sometimes a reporter will write a headline. Sometimes, if that headline won't fit, then it's up to whoever's designing the page to do the headline, and it's also up to them to read the story to make sure they understand it. And sometimes there can be a disconnect there. Again, it's sort of like human beings. We have to rely on them to get that correct, and sometimes that doesn't happen, unfortunately. Anything? I don't know if you...
John, you were chuckling. Why were you chuckling? I want to know what you were thinking.
I forgot.
I mean, sometimes the reporter is the editor. Sometimes, it varies. The process is as Jason described it. Reporter writes story. It's read by at least one, usually two, if not three people before it's in print the next morning. Oftentimes that headline is being changed by someone who is strictly kind of the night editor, design person. We try and talk out any issues that may arise in the coverage of a story and determine how to navigate through those if need be. I think we're pretty fortunate in this community that a lot of people who are doing this job have been doing it for a long time and are pretty experienced.
And on the flip side of that, we're fortunate in this community that a lot of people read the media. It's a very educated community, so that if we do screw up, we hear about it.
And we want to hear about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, especially like at 6:30 in the morning. Earlier the better.
But that said, I run into it sometimes where people tell me, months ago I made this mistake, and it happens, and we want to make sure to correct that in the record so it doesn't get repeated.
Well, the headline writing thing. Headline writing is hard. It doesn't seem like it would be from the sidelines. It's really hard, especially if you're trying to do a one-column headline. You have to have implied verbs and such, and you have to say Seedale instead of Carbondale. You have the same issue with not just between a reporter and editor, but between a reporter and a photographer too. I mean, that's another thing, because there's these things called cut lines, and few are the photographers in the world who can string a sentence together. I can't take a picture, they can't write. So it's cut lines sometimes, or I have that same issue, that it's like, oh boy, I really wish I had have written that cut line. So you're dealing with a whole bunch of different people with a hard deadline coming up. It has to get sent to press. The story came in late, the meeting went long, and this stuff has to happen fast. And sometimes there is a headline disconnect. There's no doubt on that. That's why I was laughing.
I also think corrections are something that I know for a fact all of our organizations take pride in doing. I mean, it's part of the job. Again, I don't know why I'm speaking for everyone else up here, but we had recently did a story on the Utah legislator who was in a controversy over his role in the revised Grand Staircase Escalante Monument. You guys may have heard about this, and a Republican lawmaker, and we ran a story that he resigned suddenly when some kind of controversial stuff came out. We then learned that, in fact, one of the sources in our story got back to us and said, technically he retired, not resigned. So that's an example of where we weren't gunning to get the story wrong. We weren't trying to spin this. We thought that's what happened, and then we got the correction. And I just went to look it up, and the way we decided to handle in this case was we actually we put the word retires into the headline and put an asterisk and at the bottom of the which is very unusual to put an asterisk in a headline. But we did that because we wanted to make it really clear that we made our correction and then it draws your attention to that correction. So I think a lot of times there's this perception that we want to cover up our mistakes, and at least I can say for sure at KDK, and I really trust the rest of these folks too, that that's not the case. We want to get it right. We're not spinning. That's not our goal.
I was just wondering, between the two daily papers, it seems like there's not that much overlap from one paper to another, and I wondered how you folks manage that with the local stories. It seems like, they aren't repeated between the two papers very often on a given day.
Take that.
I mean, I would argue that they often are, but it just depends on the story. I think specific to the county, Jason probably writes, the Times has more Pitkin County articles, more resources to cover Pitkin County than the Daily does at this present moment in time. We try, if we match each other, that's fine. I know from my perspective, if the Times has a story and they beat us on it, it's not. I don't like to just go and repeat the same story. I'm gonna have whatever we write advance it in some fashion, because that seems kind of lame. Just even if it's your own original reporting, and maybe you were almost there, and I guess it just depends. But
well, I was going to say, we don't talk to each other. So I don't know what they're working on. They don't know what we're working on. It comes out the next morning, and then we sort of go from there. If there's something in the Daily News that I need to follow, then as he said, we'll figure out another way to get into that. I think that we do have a couple more, or at least one more reporter too, so that can play into it. And also, I was going to say that one of the things that this town has that practically no other town in America has anymore are two daily newspapers, and what that does is keeps us on our toes. We can't get lazy, because if we get lazy and say, I'm going to wait till next week on that because I've got other stuff to do, then he gets it first, and then we have to come back on, and we had it first, and we're like, what do you do? So it's a good competitive environment that doesn't exist many other places, and for it to exist here in Aspen, Colorado is pretty kind of amazing.
In a town this size.
Yeah.
Different reporters have different things they're interested in. That's just another. Now, if it's something big, there was this big mental health thing that went on with the county government. What was it, a month and a half ago, something like that? That was, both papers were going to have that. That was a big story that had 700 people cussing and calling each other names and stuff. But aside from those things, we're human beings too. So we each have our own interests, and we go off in our own directions, and we each drink beer with different people and hear different stories and stuff. So it's there's a lot going on in this county. I used to work in Granby for the paper in Granby, Colorado. And there was a weekly paper. And I remember one time we were seriously thinking that we were going to have to put a school lunch menu item on the front page. and we said, we sat, and it was the best written school lunch menu you have ever seen. Our friend, milk. But fortunately, somebody arsoned the building. So we're very thankful for that. But what I was going to say is that there are days where we wake up in our profession and say, I should be doing 75 things today. But there are other days where we wake up and say, I have no idea what I'm going to write today.
What the hell am I doing today?
So that's where proactive information dissemination from county employees is very helpful. I mean, you guys might not think that something you're working on is that interesting. Work is drudgery. We all think what we're doing is drudgery. But we might think that's interesting. So I would err on the side of we might be interested in that. So I would contact us or run it by Pat to see if it's something that would be worthy of a story. Because there are days we wake up and say, oh no, what am I going to write?
Well, yeah, the paper's blank. Tomorrow's paper is blank at this point. So.
The other who here has seen the movie The Post? A few of you. I recommend the film. There's a scene pretty early on where basically every staffer at the Washington Post is reading the New York Times Pentagon Papers story that day. And of course that motivates all of them to go and pound the pavement and then the Nixon administration, yada yada. But I mean that's one of the things we do is we are really excited by the robust amount of journalism we have here. I'm sure you guys have heard that 30% more of the Denver Post is about to all get slashed. So, so we're really lucky even just to have a couple dozen working journalists in this area. I mean, it's ugly out there.
Sure. This is a question for Allison. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So I've noticed that Aspen Public Radio plays a special role in the community with the leadership that you've shown around pulling together the housing panels. And it's a really unique role for radio that I haven't seen before. And so can you talk a little bit about how that emerged, how you, as a station, pulled that together and sort of why?
Yes, thanks for asking. We're really proud of that, and we want to do more. We are a local public radio station. Our market and the people who are working in our newsroom want to cover Aspen, Pitkin County, the Roaring Fork Valley. We have the relationship with NPR, so we have all the national and international news. We don't even have to worry about that. We get to just talk about you guys. And there's a lot of conversations that merit a lot of perspectives, a lot of in-depth discussions. Our intention at first was to do a town hall every month on different subjects. Our first town hall, preparing for our first town hall on housing, we knew it couldn't be one. There's so many different players involved, and there's so many people to talk to in each one of those aspects that's what we've decided to concentrate on until we fix the problem. I think it's the thing that was so successful about the last one that we did was we reached out for a month on, we have airwaves, like we have this great resource to ask the community how they're feeling. We reached out for a month and got so many people to call in, or we would meet up for an interview and ask their own questions that we made a whole medley of the air the morning of the town hall, so you could kind of hear what your friends and neighbors are thinking and worried about and how they do or don't agree with you, which means by the time you get to a conversation like that, you've kind of established where you sit, or you've heard a perspective you've never heard before, so that those aren't the launch of the discussion. That's we've already kind of heard the tornado, and we're going to find the center at those. We would love to do health issues. We would love to do addiction issues and mental health. Right now, though, even those are a little bit on hold. What I've realized is that people really want to get up in the face of their elected officials and the people who are working on this and ask them a very direct question, usually very anecdotal question about their own situation. So we're talking about some brew, like policy in a pint, or something that I think is a disgusting name that I thought of that I love, called lunch meets, where we come here and have 3 people from the department that's working on this, literally sitting down for an hour at a round table with whoever community members want to show up and answering questions one-on-one. I can moderate that, and we can record that and put it out. So we want to be that civic center. It's such a geographically huge valley with so many similar issues that there's got to be a one-stop shop for having a community conversation. While we're passing that around, I have some other fun things about our newsroom that came up. Like, knowing who to talk to about the thing that you want to pitch is really important. It's not really important, but it'll get you there faster. So we have a general account, news at aspenpublicradio.org, to send any press release. But we have a lot of beat reporters. So Elizabeth Stewart-Severy is probably who the Pitkin County workers talk to the most. She's our environment reporter. I do a lot of government as well. We have an arts and culture reporter, if you guys have any events or anything kind of reflecting that aspect of our community. And we have someone who does the entire Down Valley, but there are parts of Pitkin County that is in his purview. So I brought business cards for every single one of them, so you can contact them directly.
GR?
So in the age of social media, obviously a lot of stories can travel a lot faster now, 1. And then 2, you can get a lot a quicker cross-section of a reaction to a story. How has that changed how you guys are covering particularly local government stories?
Social media, how we cover it, I don't see a whole lot of change other than, like, for instance, Benny the Blade this weekend. All over town Benny was dead. And so that became my job to find out, is he? So that story got posted immediately as soon as I found out about him on Saturday, probably about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Normally it would have waited before social media and to the next paper because we wouldn't have had. So that's the one thing that jumps to my mind in terms of how we cover things. But the way I would write a story or cover it really hasn't changed a whole lot other than it can get to you faster.
A lot of publications that aren't in Aspen are digital first media. You hear that term a lot. I hate it. My main thing is I've really started lately in the past year or two using social media as a source for stories. And that's been like, I almost feel like I'm eavesdropping on somebody at a bar or something like that. But I mean, like, you know, the Basalt community page. I've gotten numerous stories out of the Basalt community page. And so in that regard, it's been like, this has just made my life a lot easier. But a lot of publications now, you're writing first and foremost for the digital edition of the publication. And Aspen is very lucky that that has not permeated the local journalism environment. Why? Because the writing is usually a lot worse. You have to write it in 17 seconds. You don't have much time to verify stuff, and there's more mistakes, and it's just not as much fun. You know, it is. You're not writing, you're regurgitating or something. I don't know what I was going to use a worse term, but so.
And the comments section too, you know, like that's
where I was follow up.
You know, I'm pretty wary of a lot of that because I believe that is not a scientific sample of public opinion. The folks who feel the need to weigh in via the comment section.
But nonetheless, it does definitely affect our reporting. For instance, the kid who shot the dog down at Redstone. Because of the comments online, the public defender asked to close the hearing, and the judge agreed that it was somehow hate speech. So you all don't get to know what's going on in that. Normally you would, even though juvenile hearings juvenile records are closed to us, they're off limits. We can sit in the judge's chambers while they conduct a hearing with a juvenile as long as we don't reveal that juvenile's age. And they took away that one access that we do have on something like that because of somebody saying this kid ought to, burn in hell or whatever.
So if you see someone who's commenting and it seems like they have a bone to pick, even if they have an alias, I guarantee you I've seen that name every single day on every single story. So we do have the ability to know, like, oh, we are a very small community. I know exactly who that is or who told them to write that. So you get offended or scared that, like, they're giving misinformation on the one story that you're a part of, but I've seen that name. I know who that is. I wouldn't worry too much about that. I think it's only a benefit because of source building and broadening perspectives. So if we just talk to you guys who are the talking heads and didn't know that there was an alternative person or strategy for solutions kind of stuff, or if I need to know if someone agrees or I need to know if the public disagrees with what the government's doing, and that's the most fun, easiest way to find that out. We fact checked all of that, and we find the validity for the person who's impassioned as much as we do the straight line PR press release. But I think it really expands the conversation in a way that reflects the community better than ever before.
And I think social media helps a lot too. If there's a road closure, we can get that out there and tell you for your commute. You go around it because of a snowstorm or a crash or something like that. And I think it does, on the flip side of what John was saying, it helps too. It doesn't only hurt
But it can hurt. My wife worked at the Alliance Center in Denver at Common Cause for many years, and there was an active shooter there about 2 years ago. It was a really tragic thing. In a nutshell, an angry guy came and shot his ex and then shot himself. It was awful, but it was also even worse for everyone who knew people in that building because the information on social media was wildly inaccurate. So that's another thing that I think I want to say again, how much I respect the organizations represented here is that we've all made mistakes, but I just think we're we're grounded in capital J journalism in our newsrooms, and that's really important. My first ever digital news job, I worked for a website called rawstory.com. I'm sure some of you have read it. It's kind of gone downhill even worse over the years, in my opinion. At the time when I was there, it was the number 25 biggest news website in the world. Like, you know, in the Huffington Post peak, we were right up there, and it was the biggest readership in my career. I'll never probably have that kind of audience again. And our job was to write 5 original reported pieces in 6 hours every day. You know, it was like blog aggregation crapola, you know. And there are some good people there. They're certainly not tuned in today, but you know, just to be clear, like there were some good people there. But I mean, I just really respect the attention that these newsrooms put into their work by comparison. One last thing about the social media question. Some of you might be aware that there's a sheriff in Garfield County. He has an online segment that he uses social media to promote called Just the Facts, which is, I would say, an ironic choice for the title for that segment. But it's incredible how, for you in public service, the use of social media might actually mean you do reach more people. And I would just caution you to think carefully about how you frame things, because that was, you know, so then after he did a Just the Facts video with a lot of really political statements, then he came back the next Just the Facts video and said, we just need to all come together and not be so divisive. And it was like, well, you just spent the last Just the Facts, you know, insulting half of your population, or whatever, you know, 40% of your voters or whatever. So it's just that's just an example of sometimes the social media use is really great for generating attention, but it may muddy the waters with your intent. So
that was crazy. That sheriff, that was one of the craziest things. But that thing had how many comments?
Yeah, that was one of those instances where someone's social media post made news, which is
700 comments. I want to say it was some amazing thing. And his mea culpa was did not smooth things out very well.
Greg?
Yeah. Oh, hi. I just wanted to thank you all for being here, and I'm really enjoying watching you all up in the hot seats up there because it's just so
tables
fun
have
to
turned.
turn it around a little bit. And I was thinking, what could you share with the people who aren't really used to being up in front of, you know, do you feel uncomfortable at all when you're in front of a crowd? And what do you each do to make people feel more comfortable, say in an interview situation where you're contacting someone who doesn't usually speak to the press?
Well, I mean, you hit it on the head. You try and do make them comfortable, and you don't make it adversarial. That's really the key. Even if it's a tough subject to talk about, there are ways that you can, for instance, I mean, I think what comes to mind are like obituaries, somebody's dead. And, you know, you have to be extremely careful about how you interview somebody in that situation, or the kinds of questions that you ask. But not just that, I mean, we recognize, like, you know, I talk to Brian a lot, I talk to John a lot, and I talk to Greg a lot, but people like, you know, if I interviewed Jill at the jail or something, you know, I recognize that Jill doesn't appear in the paper very often, and that if she says something and then says, oh God, I shouldn't say that, can you not put that in the paper? Yeah, of course. You know, I'm not, again, the rest of us have to deal with you again tomorrow, you know? And so once we blow that relationship, you know, it's over. You're not going to talk to me again, and I can't do my job. So, you know, you do try and make people feel more comfortable.
So I'm not nervous because I'm not gonna, I know all the answers about myself, and that's the same thing I tell everyone I call. I mean, you know all the right answers. I'm gonna ask you to say your name and title. You know that. I'm gonna ask you to talk about what you're working on. You know that. So I can't think of a story where I'm calling you hoping to ask you something where you don't know the answer. That's the point, is that I'm explaining it better. So I think you can't really go wrong with the knowledge that you have and just sharing that. What happens at the radio is that almost everyone says, I hate the sound of my voice, which is a totally different thing to be shy about. And that, when you ask, like, what drives us crazy, that's way up there, because I need that. I need that actuality. And you don't sound bad. You sound like yourself. And, you know, like, just all that, like, it's not vanity. I get why you feel that way, but I would say that's the thing with talking to a radio station, is, like, kind of forget that you do or don't like the sound of your voice. We need that information. I have a couple tips too for like a press release if you're trying to get us to grab on to what you guys are getting us to cover. It'd be, first of all, the biggest heads up possible. We have a 4-person news team. We can't just be sending people out moment of unless it literally is breaking news, and then we do drop everything to cover it. But a huge heads up. In that press release, if you could say there'll be speeches or something audio related where I know I can go and set a recorder down, or there should be a crowd, there'll be, when you dedicated the new Veterans Park, there'll be music, things like that, that specific to us, we would love to cover, and that would make that piece so rich. If there's good photo opportunities, like the kid is gonna get the star, the award, like, great, we'll make sure we get a photo. Pat, you had a great example earlier about we don't really want to cover if someone got an award, which is kind of true, unless you can explain to me how that affects the day-to-day life of our community. So if you're named, best at something statewide, there's a state agency that says best road and bridge taking care of it. That's not news unless that means we now qualify for way bigger grants and our road and bridges are going to be better taken care of. So think of the next step and how the person walking down the street listening to Aspen Public Radio, how their life is going to change because of the news you're telling me. And that's what we'll cover.
I would also counter that when I can, I want us to do positive stuff. I mean, we talked about solutions and innovations, but also I wish there was, again, part of it for us comes back to inventory. That for us, if we have just a few minutes each day in our NPR clock to focus on local news, sometimes the certificate of merit stuff just doesn't fit, in terms of the urgency. But one other thing I think that's really important to get back to Greg's question is the, So I was going to say, I don't know if I'm being too informal. Is the KD&K, as I stumble, this is a perfect example of my point, which is that we always try to edit every guest to make them sound their best. Whether we completely think the person is the coolest, or we're like, oh, in either case, we always try to cut out ums and ahs. And it also comes back to the clock. I only have 90 seconds for a short little interview segment. I want to get the most important stuff out there. So that's another comfort level thing. And I definitely don't hear many ums and ahs on our more professional friends here. So that's I think that we do try to edit to put what you're trying to say in the best possible light. I've never once intentionally taken any of my sources out of context, and I often point to our relationship with Congressman Tipton. He knows that we are going to ask him adversarial questions pretty much every month. I mean, that's kind of guaranteed with our newsroom, and he's very much a talking points machine. The guy sticks to the script so effectively. He's really good at doing that. But we've never once taken him out of context and tried to make him look bad, and I think that it's proven that he keeps coming back to us.
How do you feel about someone saying no comment or I can't confirm or deny that? How does that make you feel as a reporter when you hear that?
Well, if I know you're holding something back, it's kind of like what these guys said. That just makes me more anxious to get the answer I'm looking for. I understand that sometimes people are not inclined to speak about something. It just depends on the situation.
Yeah, it depends on the why. Why are you saying no comment? Is it because it's against federal law for you to tell me that? Well, then I get it. If it's because you personally don't think that should be in the newspaper, then I'm annoyed.
Yeah. How do we do on that?
Well, as I said, it's nice, as John said, to have that you empower your staff to talk to the press. And, as opposed to the city, really, there's a big difference. I mean, I did a story about fish sticks in lunchroom.
They're still mad about that.
I know. And exactly the point. I interviewed somebody that really, I couldn't get the person I wanted, so I had to talk to this other person, and she was answering. She talked like this. I was like, what? I can't hear what you're saying. She just whispered. And so we're just talking about a kind of a goofy story here. I'm not trying to make you look stupid. And really, so the answer is you do well. I mean, your employees talk to me, which is great. And also, not having to go through a PIO in Denver, like this fatal crash. I had to talk to this Colorado State Patrol person in Denver who had no idea what that intersection looked like, no idea what this crash looked like, no idea about anything on the western slope, and he got it wrong. I reported it. We had to walk it back. It's like, so I mean, I appreciate it greatly.
Only say no comment if you don't really. I mean, I can't remember the last time I got a hard no comment from a public official up here.
Which is different than I don't know. If you don't know,
if you don't know, you don't know.
I've gotten no comments that are, they didn't want to talk on that subject, and it's like, all right, I'm gonna look deep into your background now. But I think one of the other things that's some people are more comfortable talking on the phone, being interviewed on the phone. Some people are more comfortable being interviewed face to face. Some people are more comfortable doing email interviews or text interviews. So one of the things I try to figure out is what is the person going to be the most comfortable doing. I mean, emails I love because you can just cut and paste their quotes, and you're not going to screw them up. But trying to figure out what's most comfortable to the person, and also giving them warning about when you're going to call or something like that, so they have a chance to gather their thoughts. You can't always do it, but I find that to be a real. And also, I like to go out and have beers with my sources too. I mean, I know how weird that sounds, but everything off the record, just kind of getting to know each other, and I find that to be. You get to know each other as human beings a little bit. It's not just the professional interview, everything's on the record kind of thing. So, I mean, there's nobody in this room that I've done that with. Nudge, nudge.
How do you feel about somebody saying, after you've quoted them, you say, "Could you tell me what you heard me just say?" Is that a good practice for people if they're talking to you and then they go, "Okay, so can you read back to me what you just wrote that I said?" Is that weird for you guys?
That's legitimate. I mean, that if someone is really concerned that they're being quoted accurately, you can ask that. You can't ask to read the story.
Right.
But as far as direct quotes, yeah, that's fair game.
Yeah, I mean, it's slightly. I mean, it's kind of annoying, but I mean, it doesn't really happen that often. More often I'll get, "Can I read the story?" And I don't get that very often, and that will never happen. But, if you want me to to repeat back what you just said to me to make sure that I got it, that's, as Curtis said, that's generally fine.
But it's also like, usually hopefully we're getting that right, 99.9% of the time.
Scott had a recorder the other day. I don't know how many print reporters do. I can literally play it back. I'm using your quote, so there's not a lot of room for argument that you didn't say that.
Another big thing on that sort of prior review or just asking to see the article before it's published is the well-intentioned community organizations versus us as media outlets. So Carbondale just had a trustee candidate forum that we co-hosted with the Carbondale Chamber, which we're proud members of, and we didn't give the candidates the questions in advance. We came with pretty straightforward. It wasn't like any big gotcha stuff, but we thought it was important that the voters could see them think on their seats, in this case, not on their feet. But whereas Basalt Chamber hosted their event, which I think Amy Gabb was filming that one, in Basalt Chamber's case, they gave all the candidates the questions in advance. We're proud members of the Basalt Chamber too, but I'm just saying it can be a little different when you have a media organization versus just sort of a do-gooder or community group. And I do think that that's sort of a judgment call on a campaign coverage thing, but I don't know. I think that there are big differences, and you'll often deal with other organizations in a similar way you deal with us. But remember that they don't necessarily have a newsroom. No one thinks of Basalt Chamber as asking the tough questions, so that was perfectly appropriate. But maybe for them. But I just thought it was important in our case that we also, two of the candidates for Carbondale Chamber or Carbondale trustees right now are KD&K DJs. So that was also, we wanted to make sure there was no tipping of anything to anybody. So
we're going to take a few more questions, Brian.
The county manager made a clear distinction between national media and local media. And it made me think, while you all are sitting up there, especially newspaper folks, how does it work when you write a story, and do you write differently if you think there will be a national attention paid to the story and the AP would pick it up?
I mean, the short answer, no. You can sometimes tell, but half the time I think it's going to go crazy and it doesn't, and something that goes crazy, you're like, that little thing. So No. I mean, the last thing I wrote that went kind of crazy was the gay flag at the Mike Pence house that we had a pretty good idea was going to get some attention nationwide, not maybe quite the amount that it got. I'm still getting Twitter notices about it, but no, it doesn't really change it, I don't think.
I agree.
Just so you know, if we do pitch something national and they take it, we have a whole nother edit with NPR National. So we write for local, and then it would be reworked. It wouldn't be that story that goes on
Right, they'll
national.
just take it. They'll just take it and do whatever they want with it anyway. So the way we write it, generally, well, sometimes won't even appear that way when it gets to the national media, and it'll have somebody else's byline on it.
Last chance. Is there anything that you guys would like to say, anything you'd like to share with our employees about your pet peeves or things that we do that really bug you, like sending press releases at 5:30 p.m. on a Friday?
Yeah, don't do that.
Mike, sorry. Any pet peeves? Any tips, last-minute tips for things like that?
I just loved the slide you had up at the end of the last presentation. It really made me feel welcome as a member of the press walking into this room, and I think that this whole panel is a great example of potential strengthening of these relationships. So I just really appreciate you asking us to come.
Yeah, I saw that slide too. I think it was the same one that John had up that said, tell the truth. And I was really struck by the one that said, be friendly, but remember that the reporter's not your friend. And I think...
Oh, go ahead. And I clarify that.
Well, I think, but and I think that that's a really important distinction, because we may have to write about you doing something that you don't want to appear in the paper someday, and if you come to me and say, hey, can you keep that out of the paper? The answer is going to be no. So, but I thought that was that you don't see that very often, and that's an important distinction.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going after. I also pointed out you're all very nice people, and we should be friends. We just need to understand our roles. So.
Well, and it is really important that we earn your trust when it comes to on the record, off the record. If a reporter burns you on something, that reporter is likely going to not get the same relationship with you. So we want to build that trust when we can. Again, I don't want to speak for you guys, but I mean, that's been big for me going from news director to station manager, because now I have to, and there are certain cases where I have to keep a firewall between myself and the judgment of my two news staff. But I'm still kind of their executive editor. I came from that seat, and that's my background is journalism. And so I just think that it's tricky with especially in smaller communities. In Denver, it's much different. But we, at least with KD&K, again, I'm not speaking for everyone else. If you tell someone from KD&K something off the record, and then we run that, then we should acknowledge that there are repercussions. I mean, maybe you just don't speak to us as openly again. I hope you will, and I hope you'll trust us. And I don't know that we've done that, but I'm just saying, I think that it is to some degree. The having a beer with John sounds really fun. I talk too much, so I don't know that I would do that if I had anything up my sleeve. I don't have anything to hide. We're pretty transparent at KD&K, but so I think that trust is really a two-way street.
The other thing is, if you're going to be off the record, man, you got to be clear about that.
For sure.
I mean, how many times have we each done like an hour-long interview, and somebody says, "Oh, well, that was all off the record," or you get a call like 2 hours later saying that was off the record.
Or they say something and then go, that's off the record. No. I'll work with you generally, especially if I have to deal with you every day. But if it's something that I really want, and I'll generally work with you, but that's not how that's going to work. If you blurt something out and then say that's off the record, generally want to reverse that order.
I think the distinction between background and off the record is important there too. If you tell me I'll talk to you, but off the record, I will say who else will talk to me then. I don't want to. I don't want to know. I don't want that. I want you to talk to me on the record. So that's probably a whole nother panel. I have one pet peeve, not to end on a bad note either, but like if I call you and I have you on the phone and I'm writing something that needs to go out as quick as possible, and I ask you a question, you say, oh, it's on the website, or even if I want to know what time a meeting is or something, well, it's, go to Pitkin County, go to the website, and then click agendas, and then click down through if I'm trying to get old minutes or something. Like if you were there and I just want to say, what did the commissioners think when you said that? if you can just answer instead of saying it's in the minutes or like blah, 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 I'll send you the link. It's one sentence. I don't want to have to go look it up. And so it's a little bit of a laziness thing, but it also might be the difference of that story going or not. So.
And the world revolves around us. Remember that, okay?
If you remember one thing from this panel.
I just want to say on behalf of all of us at KD&K that Pitkin County has been amazing supporting public radio in this valley through the Translator Association. Again, it's benefited both of our stations, but that's been essential to our ability to reach as many people as possible with serving the public. So thank you.
All right. Well, I think that's one more.
Mentioned on background. Is this one dead too? Just you didn't say what on background means as opposed to off the record.
Sometimes you aren't the right person to ask about something, but you've been there, you know it. So you don't like the sound of your voice. But if I am going to ask the correct person, but you can give me, I don't know all the code for a certain resolution that you're about to pass, and you say, I'm not really the official. I'm not sure that I know it all right either, but I know it started in 1970. Here's the person who really got this going, and a housing partnership or something like that, who you should really talk to about is blank. That's fine. You gave me some facts. They might get worked into the story. They might just help me ask better questions to the correct person. So I'm not quoting you because you don't feel comfortable being the representative of this story, but you'll give me as much information. You'll kind of tell me how that developed or some of the background information. Yeah, it's not off the record. It's not secrets. You just don't want to be the point person on that. I have business cards for all our reporters if you would like them.
Thank you very much.
Business cards for all our reporters too, right, Curtis?
Yeah.